we are going to do something unprecedented. We're going to start on time at an event in New York City when it's raining out. We kind of expected that everyone would be a good 15, 20 minutes late. So either you all are close by or you're excited to hear Rodney and Joanne talk. So it's too bad because we needed a few more minutes to talk about stuff that's been happening today. This is an ever-changing moment. You'll appreciate some of our slides are fairly general in nature, and we're going to be filling it in with commentary. So let me just do a quick introductions, and then we'll get started. A few brief administrative points. After the event, when we get done with our content here, we will be having a brief cocktail hour. So hopefully if you haven't had a chance to meet each other, you'll be able to stay and have a drink or two with us, and it's right outside. If you're looking for the restroom, hopefully you can hold it for an hour, but if not, go out. It's a big circle, so you just keep walking until you see a sign that says restroom. It is kind of directly across from us here, but on the other side of the hallway. So my name is Bethany Hills. I am the chair of the FDA practice here at Mintz-Levin, and we are very pleased to have so many people here join us this evening. We get a chance to showcase for you how important it is that our FDA practice is integrated with our healthcare practice, because we firmly believe that the FDA actions and what's going on with product development and innovation do not happen in isolation. In fact, they are part of our healthcare delivery system, very much part of our healthcare system in the country. And if you haven't heard, healthcare and the focus on our healthcare delivery system might be a hot topic in the next few months. So we are really tracking the way that those interact, and we're happy to have Rodney join us. Rodney Whitlock has over 20 years experience working with U.S. Congress. Most notably, he's had a lengthy career as a health policy advisor to Senator Charles Grassley of Iowa. Rodney is now, more importantly, the VP of Health Policy at ML Strategies, which is our government relations and consulting firm, where we have bipartisan representation, thank goodness, because things change. And we help clients respond to and influence policy, especially in the healthcare field. And Joanne Juana is of counsel in our FDA practice and brings a very diversified background. We're thrilled to have her join us here in DC, despite the fact that each time she's come, the last 4 trips have all been raining. So something bad with your, either it's you or it's us, we don't know. She was a lab scientist studying gene expression, and then was a managing editor at a DC bioscience trade publication. And she counsels clients on all aspects of FDA regulation and policy, using her DC network extensively to help us mingle and reach people that can help with our clients. So if you go to the next slide, we have an agenda that's going to take us, we promise, 1 hour. We won't go into too much detail. There's a ton of information. We really hope that you will ask questions. This is meant to be an interactive experience. We think we can learn from you, you can learn from us, and we hope that this will be something that will really enhance everyone's understanding of what's going on. We are recording the session, so if you want to share this information with colleagues and friends, you will be able to. You'll get a copy of the slides, so don't feel like you have to vigorously take notes. You'll get the slides and the recording afterwards. And we're going to start with Rodney. He's going to talk to us about the journey and where we're going.
All right, thank you all. I'm Rodney Whitlock, an escapee of the Hill, retiree, parolee, depending upon your perspective. But now what I am is I'm a consultant. I'm a Washington insider. I'm a lobbyist. And so you may have heard Friday that I'm part of the problem, just to let you know. So I'll let you know now that in fact, I'm not evil, all right? I had my horns, the plastic surgery took care of those. I wear pants for my, my forked tail. So you have my word as a lobbyist. I will not use any of my evil lobbyist mind tricks to cause you to want to or think to do anything against your interests. I promise. I wouldn't do that. Okay, so what I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to give you a broad brush view of where we are in healthcare in Washington right now. Particularly, I'll focus briefly on the Affordable Care Act, to give you just some general context on that, and then I'll pivot to the drug world. And in those, again, I'm going to give you sort of a high-level picture of where things are going right now, And if you'd like to delve into this more extensively through Q&A or visiting with me afterwards, that's certainly available to you, but we'll then turn it over to my colleagues for a much deeper dive into the legal and regulatory side of the world. So the presentation I've worked up is what I refer to as the journey. And to explain the concept, I begin with the famous nihilist Friedrich Nietzsche, which, quoting a nihilist in today's world, seems to make one heck of a lot of sense if you really think about it. There are no facts, only interpretations. And so, you know, I actually was working this up before Friday and Saturday. And so, you know, and then Friday and Saturday and Sunday, and I'm like, damn, I'm so good at this. When I set this up, and in fact, there are no facts. It's only interpretation. Then the other side is alternative facts. I got to work that one in at some point. On the other side, though, is another quote, and that is, there are no solutions, only trade-offs. Thomas Sowell, economist. And what I will argue to you, that public policy in this new Republican world is on a journey. And it is on a journey from Friedrich Nietzsche to Thomas Sowell. What do I mean by that? Republicans are in a world where they are moving from 7 years of being able to say pretty much anything with impunity. Why? Because anything they said was not really consequential. You can say anything you want about the Affordable Care Act, and as long as you don't have the power to actually do anything about it, it doesn't really matter. And that's what you have, is 7 years of policy experience where nothing that was done by the party that is now in control meant anything. There are no facts, only interpretations. Now, we switch to a different world. And this new world order is one of consequence. It is one of every decision that you make now has the opportunity for real consequence. And Republicans are about to have to deal with the fact that there are, in fact, no solutions. In healthcare, there are no solutions. There are only trade-offs. It's how you organize things within your system and decide how you want them to work, or not work, depending upon a perspective. But it's an organization of trade-offs. The Affordable Care Act, and I'll probably step out here on a limb, is actually not a solution. The Affordable Care Act was, in fact, just the set of trade-offs decided by the polls in 2009 and 10 as how they wanted to structure healthcare reform. Republicans are on a journey to try to do the same, now in a world where the decisions are consequential. So, what do Republicans need to learn along their journey where the Affordable Care Act is concerned? There are three major points I'll have you consider when we talk about what Republicans need to do with regard to the Affordable Care Act. The first is to recognize that conceptually what they're on is a journey for transition. Okay? Repeal and replace is a slogan. It flows lovely off the tongue. It uses R's. And since Republicans are into R's, you know, let's see, I believe it's Lamar Alexander has coined the term repeal, replace, repair. And then we heard Greg Walden, the new chair of the Energy and Commerce Committee, trot out the term rebuild. So it's replace, rebuild, repair, replace. I don't know, but as long as it starts with an R, I might be onto something here. Okay? But all of these are just slogans. Right? The reality is, it's a transition. Republicans want to cover people who need insurance with private sector options in a competitive environment where individuals have the choice to choose between high-quality options that are meant to drive efficiency in care and lowering cost. Every person who put a D behind their name in 2009 and 10 thought they were doing the exact same thing. Okay? So it's effectively a transition from one set of trade-offs to another. And I can go into details on those and the sets of transitions that you can make and the different pushes and pulls you have, such that I'm very certain I can cure your insomnia, but I will state it that that's what it is. Okay? My metaphor is the distance between the Democrats' version of the trade-offs and the Republicans' version is an Uber ride. Now, if you're looking in the Medicare space between Medicare as we know it today and a premium support model, you better pack luggage because that's a long, long trip. It's a transition. The second major point for consideration is disruption. Republicans now own disruption, and they have the opportunity to be very disruptive. the cost sharing reductions that go to pay for the insurance subsidies for people who are in exchange plans. The President of the United States can make them go away in a blink. Okay. That would be disruptive, because then every plan out there has a tough decision, which is, do we get out now? Do we have to give the 180 days notice? How much money are we losing on the way? Will we even survive it? Is it existential to our existence as a health plan? And of course, if you're one of those people who had health insurance, who suddenly finds your health plan running for the door at warp speed because they no longer have payments, what do you do? Now, that is disruption. Will Republicans try to avoid disruption, or will they seek to embrace disruption? The executive order that came out on Friday night was remarkably vague in providing no actual detail. I believe I was quoted in the local paper here, what's it called, the Times, yeah, on that it was right off the box something incredibly cryptic. And it was. It actually basically says that the administration will use its legal authority legally to do something. Didn't say what, but they said they will use their legal authority legally to try to do something. Will it be disruptive? That's another thing that we'll have to learn along the way. And finally, ultimately, these are hard choices. Okay? If you have a problem with the Medicaid expansion, if you're uncomfortable with giving states a significant payment increase to cover people who are the so-called non-elderly, non-disabled, childless adults, that newly eligible population, you have to understand that if you take that payment away, there's an extremely high probability that of the 31 states that cover them, easily all of them go away. Maybe 5 stick around, but listen, the states will quit. Why? They don't have the budgetary resources to be able to withstand that. As a matter of fact, many of them have in statute that if the payment rate were to be altered in any way, they quit that moment. That's a hard choice. If you want to go that way because you believe it's wrong policy, fine, but understand the concept of the choice. And that is, it could cause disruption. These are the things the Republicans have to learn on their journey as they deal with what they want to do next in the Affordable Care Act. From here, I'll pivot to the concept of plan years and why it matters. Okay. You can blow up things now, you can blow up things next year, and then it's where you want to be on transition. So you can mess up plan year 2017. You can do it through exemptions to the individual mandate. You can do it through ending the cost sharing reduction payments. But you can cause massive chaos in this plan year if you choose to do so. You can equally cause massive chaos for plan year 18. If you make the individual mandate go away effective plan year 18, there's a high probability that plans will exit. And so, on your way to transition, what damage will you do along the way? That is, again, part of the things that will have to be discussed on that journey that they're making to address the Affordable Care Act in their own image. Let's talk drugs. All right. When we pivot to prescription drugs and where the atmosphere is in D.C. right now, I'll cite 3 basic areas here. Okay? The first of them is the concept of drug pricing. Okay. Full disclosure, I'm a policy advisor to the Campaign for Sustainable Drug Pricing. It's a group of insurers, providers, stakeholders who want to kick pharma in the shins. Okay? And while we've been doing that, out of the blue, the president-elect steps up and says they've been getting away with murder. And I looked at those remarks and I said to myself, I feel like such a pansy for how absolutely weak-kneed we've been at attacking the drug companies when he's going to walk in and say something like that. But when he says something like that, obviously the marketplace goes berserk, and they wonder what he's going to do next. What is going to be next here in drug pricing? I don't know where it's going to go, but what I do know is that it's not going away. And that for every time there's a Mylan, there's a Gilead, there's a Martin Shkreli, there's insulin, every time that the prices are going up, far greater than inflation, it will be talked about. And I'll walk you through the simple why. In healthcare, every stakeholder who works within a government payment structure is price controlled. Step 1. In Medicare, providers, particularly hospitals, have been under some structured pricing system since its inception. The docs since the 1970s. And now you move to the plans through the creation of the enforceable medical loss ratios in the Affordable Care Act. They now then are functionally limited as to how much they can make. There's only one stakeholder in healthcare who gets to write down X and ask for it and arguably get it. When you have that type of tension in the relationship, of course you're going to have conflict. And that's what you're going to see play out in 2017 and potentially beyond. High up on the list of things that must be done this year are the user fee acts. We have numbers of user fee acts. We have the Prescription Drug User Fee Act, pronounced PDUFA. The Generic Drug User Fee Act, pronounced GDUFA. We have the Medical Device, PDUFA. We have the Animal Device, PDUFA. We have the Biosimilars, which I think we are now calling BASUFA. I think I got them all. But we have lots of UFAs. And they are all up for reauthorization in 2017, which means Congress has a live vehicle to screw around with people. What will that look like? What especially will that look like in a world in which Republicans are in control in Congress and typically are predisposed to want to work positively with industry, and that guy who mentioned getting away with murder? Which then leads to the third and final point here, which is we also look to see what will happen at FDA. The user fee acts are typically worked out on a level involving the professionals. The professional staff at the FDA, along with the drug companies, work out what their targets will be, what their agreements will be, all of which they're trying to come to some level of agreement with, which is much more professional in nature before you get the political involved. The FDA commissioner has not been named yet, but we know it will not be Robert Califf. We're going to have somebody new in that job. How far culturally will that new person look to push the envelope in terms of particularly moving the process through in terms of the approval process? How significant will that change be? To the point of being really something that we have not seen in an FDA, arguably in the FDA's existence. If you look at some of the names considered already out there and some of the things that they have said in the past, you're looking at the potential for real cultural change, and what that means in terms of questions of safety, efficacy, and approval remain to be seen. So that is sort of the table setting for what we're looking at Washington right now. I'll then turn to my colleagues here, Joanne, to start on some of the more details on the legal and regulatory side. And of course, I'll accept questions until the cows come home or the rain or whatever, but you'll quit when I say so. Because I will use my PowerPoint. Thank you for that.
Does anybody have any questions for Rodney now before we switch gears a little bit?
You don't have questions yet.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Apologize for my lingering cough. So as Rodney said, we're going to switch from the legislative side to more regulatory issues, and what I think many of you want to hear about is our predictions for FDA. But first we want to talk a little bit about legislation in terms of rolling back the ACA and obviously, as Rodney talked about, transition and repeal. One thing that we've gotten a lot of questions about is whether the law that created the biosimilars pathway, which is called the Biosimilars Price Competition and Innovation Act, the BPCIA, was enacted as part of the Affordable Care Act in 2010, whether that is also going to be repealed. And our indications at this point is that that's likely to be carved out of any repeal efforts. We have seen statements by Republican congressmen that it's not on the table. It's not necessarily a market that needs disruption. It's really a market that we have on the slide, philosophically consistent in terms of they want to promote competition, and if the issue is drug pricing, well, getting rid of the biosimilars pathway is not going to help with the drug pricing issue for those complicated biological products. So we haven't heard any indications of the BPCIA being part of that repeal and replace effort at the congressional level. We also wanted to talk about regulations, guidance, and sort of sub-regulatory activity, because it's not just, as Rodney said, it's obviously there's statutory changes that can be made, but there's at a regulatory agency like FDA that has a lot of moving pieces, there's other layers as well, and all of those are right now sort of being talked about as being rolled back. So moving sort of from statute down, the next would be regulations, formal notice and comment regulations. And there is a process called under the Congressional Review Act, which I don't know how many of you are familiar with, but it's actually a fairly unique and interesting legislative vehicle. It allows Congress to overturn final regulations from any agency. So obviously this is not just an FDA issue, but of any agency. It has to be a final rule. And they would be by joint resolution of disapproval. So both houses would have to disapprove the final regulation, and of course, the president would have to sign it. And this is why you never really see this. You don't hear about the CRA, being used to overturn final rules, because certainly, if it's you're the president and it's your administration, your agency, your FDA that just issued a final rule, you are going to veto any sort of joint resolution of disapproval that Congress might send you. And Obama actually did veto several of those during his term, because why would he sign off on, okay, repeal my regulation? So in this case, what we're looking at potentially is a Republican-controlled Congress that has a very long time period of final regulations that they can look back at. And I guess the legislative process, the parliamentary process is a little bit complicated. We won't go into that, and I don't even know it really, since I've never served in Congress. But suffice it to say that anything finalized after the May 30th is what the cutoff date appears to be according to the Congressional Budget Office. So right now, if there are final rules that either FDA or other agencies promulgated from May 30th, 2016 until now, until January 20th, 2017, that you are you're concerned about, you want to have either overturned or protected, we would encourage you to get involved with the political process, contact your representatives, your lobbyists, whoever, because I think this is a very real thing. Congress is absolutely, the House has already passed a resolution related to the CRA, and there will be things overturned. We don't know exactly what yet, but certainly there's a lot that FDA did certainly in the last 3 months since the election, but even in the last, going back to May, the last 6-8 months. So that's at the regulatory level. And then I'm going to let Bethany talk a little bit about guidance documents, because those of you that do a lot with FDA, there's a lot of guidance as well.
And I'm looking too, I have this list in our notes. We have at least 15 final rules identified, which we won't read off to all of you. But a few, there's nutrition facts and serving size regulations. There's the very important clinicaltrials.gov final rule. There are final rules that have been issued around intended use. If any of you read our blog, you would see that there's a new intended use requirement that's part of a tobacco rule. Talk about hiding things. So there are a number that are there as final rules, which we're keeping a hit list. I think Joanne counted 29 recently or something like that. So it's worth paying attention to, because those, talk about disruption, those could very easily go away and very quickly. And it's an unusual circumstance. The reason we're mentioning it is it's not very typical to happen in a transition like this. And there's quite a bit of prior rulemaking that could be at risk.
And just, I guess, to put that in historical context, the only time the CRA has been used at the changing of the White House level is George W. Bush overturned one regulation of the Clinton Labor Department. It was the ergonomics rule. If you all remember, that was very politically charged back then. So it's been used one time, and this Congress is potentially looking to use it in a much broader way.
Yep. The other thing is guidance documents, and so we've had a fairly detailed debate in our group about all of the guidance documents. I don't know if any of you track the number that have come out. There have been a significant number in the last few weeks, many of them things that are very odd and we weren't expecting. Others that we were expecting, some we've been waiting for years. We still see nothing, so you have no idea what's actually going on. So we do think that guidance documents, whether they're draft or final, can easily be withdrawn. Again, this is we're going to talk in a moment here about the commissioner and the leadership at the FDA. But remember that when you're talking the nitty-gritty, the guidance documents are really those details that we look to for very specific actions that we're taking with our clients on when you should contact the FDA, how do you fill out these submissions, how do you do things, and many of those guidance documents could be at risk also. It was reported, and so I brought it to our team as an executive order because there was like a slew of executive orders. It was not. It's a chief of staff memo from Priebus. So please note that distinction. So there was Sunday, a chief of staff memo, early Monday, that specifically it's a regulatory freeze. So in addition to the CRA, where Congress can just scoop back all of these regulations that we're talking about, there is now a chief of staff memo, which I'm not really sure what weight that carries. Tell me.
Not
None?
as much.
Less?
Extremely quickly. That typically authority in legal and legislative authority works through secretaries. They have none confirmed, so the closest thing they can get to emulate that is something from the chief of staff of the president.
Okay, so we're in limbo right now. And what it says, I'm not going to read it for you, but it essentially says anything that has gone to the Federal Register that's been published, it's a total stop. Doesn't get published, it's done. Anything that's actually been published in the Federal Register, but it's still open for comment, everything there stops. Anything that is not effective yet. So if you have some of those other rules that have been finalized and they're not effective yet, all of those stop. They get an automatic 60-day delay. And so we are literally going through for our clients many of these new actions, when new rules are involved and they impact your work, trying to see if they're going to get snatched up by the CRA, if they're getting impacted by this memo. And so, again, we didn't want to go into, I have a list of guidance documents, about 11 long. I'm not going to read them to you, but be aware that we think that these are at risk, and you should be paying attention to things that matter for your product categories and for what it is that you're looking to do. And then let's talk about discretionary actions real quick.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so the last bullet, I guess, again, taking the view of, statutes, regulations, guidance, the last view would be sub-regulatory actions that an agency can take. And I just thought this was really interesting because it's affected several of our clients. And actually, Dan Hurling, my colleague in the back, and I wrote an article about it a couple weeks ago. But in December, FDA released or created a public database. They obviously had it internally, but it's the Cosmetic Adverse Event Reporting Database. I'm sorry, not cosmetic. It is cosmetic, but it's also food and dietary supplements. The C in CARES does not stand for cosmetic. It stands for CFSAN, which is the Center for Food Safety and Advanced Nutrition. I apologize for that. But so what FDA announced, what CFSAN announced, was that they were going to make this data publicly available. So there's actually a portal on their website now. You can go and view the raw data going back, many years. And it is the raw data. It's not, it's not agency determination about what does this report mean, but it's any adverse event reports they receive for cosmetics, foods, or dietary supplements. And that's something the agency just decided to do. They were under no legal mandate to make that data public. There's no, for foods and cosmetics, it's voluntary reporting as well. So I think that could be something that depending again who the next commissioner is and what their policy priorities are, that could be something easily undone. We don't want to have this data available for people to mine and potentially to litigate. Yeah, exactly. Create more risk for companies that could be targeted by these reports. So that's just another thing to think about is, are there things that the agency has done recently that are, not formal, that could just easily be undone?
Can I ask you just a quick question? What determines an adverse event? Somebody can say, well, I took this thing and I had this rash, or they could be ill for another reason.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
What determines an adverse event?
In this case, there's nothing. Anybody could send it in, and really, it's for these products, it's anything, including my package was open when I bought it. It's not even a personal harm that it has to be. So the database also includes reports of my product tasted weird, or my skin cream looked funny. So it's not just
funny.
It's not just injury reports. And so that's what I was trying to get to in terms of FDA not taking any position on was there causation
Validity.
here?
The validity.
Right, the validity of the report.
It's very different from the device adverse event database, which has standards and there are requirements for when you put things in there, and you are legally obligated to report adverse events and certain malfunctions. So it's been a little bit controversial, for sure.
Mm-hmm. So our next, shifting gears, I guess, a little bit, would be to try to articulate what we think President Trump's plans for FDA reform may be based on some of his public statements.
And tweets.
And tweets.
That was my job to look at the tweets.
Yeah. We, as Rodney said, we don't have a commissioner name, so it is hard to really know what sort of policies these will end up being encompassing. How will these goals really end up practically affecting the industry and changing, our common practice. But we wanted to raise some of the big issues for you, some of which you may have already heard about. I saw nodding when Rodney said the drug manufacturers are getting away with murder. So I know you guys are following this a little bit as well. But the first point, and that we're going to be watching very closely, is he did articulate in that same speech that he was concerned about drug manufacturing being so much overseas. And all these drug companies, make their drugs overseas, not in the U.S. What that means in terms of a policy change remains to be seen. And how do you really bring drug manufacturing back to the U.S.? I mean, what sort of rules? It's very hard to guess how you would force companies to, shut down their foreign manufacturing facilities and build facilities here. It's impossible. I won't say impossible, but it's hard to say. What I wanted to bring up was that last week there was a General Accountability Office report, GAO report, on this very issue. Not about Trump, but about foreign manufacturing. And what it found, it was looking at the rates of foreign manufacturing inspections by FDA and domestic, and also how the foreign offices that the agency has been setting up over the past 10 years or so, how that's really been going. And it's not a great report for FDA. It basically says there's still about 1,000 foreign drug manufacturing facilities that are sending drugs here that have never been inspected. So how is the coincidental timing, if it's coincidental, I think it is. I mean, GAO is not partisan. But how does that coinciding with the new administration and changing priorities and a new commissioner, how is that going to provide fodder to potentially a change in terms of manufacturing policy and rules? So I think that's just something to watch out for. We also obviously have seen a lot of strong statements against high drug prices. Certainly, we all know that FDA doesn't directly control drug prices. It does seem to get a lot of flack for the drug prices, though. You see them on the Hill sort of trying to defend the industry and defend pricing practices a little bit, even though that's not their area. And it really is going to be interesting to see what legislation through the user fee process maybe gets added to try to indirectly impact drug pricing through FDA. So do we get more generic drugs on the market quicker? Will that actually impact prices? There's a new pharma report saying that really is not the case, that increased competition doesn't directly affect prices. That was also released last week. There was a lot released last week.
There's also been a number of comments by the folks who are being considered for commissioner that the sooner you can get products through the FDA process, you cut off research and development costs, then you can launch at 20% lower cost or 30% lower cost if you can increase time. So those will intersect too when you talk about access to innovation and speed through the process. That may have its own indirect effect on pricing without the FDA having to get directly involved. I don't know, maybe we should take a poll. Does everyone agree that the FDA should not set prices for drugs? We think that might be a dangerous new area for FDA to be getting into. We have a hard enough time getting the FDA to do what they're already supposed to be doing, so let's not add another thing to their plate, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think with respect to generic drugs getting out faster, they really have been making progress on that front. I don't think you can look at the metrics of the last 5 years, the first iteration of GDUFA that we've had, and not see improvement. And indeed, as Rodney said, with the reauthorization of those GDUFA, of the user fees, including GDUFA this year, one thing that they've agreed to already, because that, as he said, the industry and FDA work out the nitty-gritty stuff on their own and send that to Congress, and then Congress is going to potentially add things, and they have to approve that, but then they're also potentially adding other bills onto it when it finally gets voted. But that GDUFA, the final GDUFA agreement is done and already sent to Congress. It was done at the end of last year. But as part of the GDUFA 2 process, FDA has already agreed to shorten review times for generic drugs, and as well as create a priority review process for generic drugs, which it currently doesn't have. I mean, technically you can ask for priority review for generics, but it's more difficult. This will really formalize that process and make it more similar to NDAs, and the fact that you can ask for a priority review for an NDA. So they are already moving towards that and have seen good progress in that. So if it's just, let's speed up generics, that's not necessarily going to solve the problem, and it's also not something that's brand new or not being done already. So there may be other types of indirect attempts to lower drug prices that would affect FDA. And there is Rodney's old boss, Senator Grassley, and also Senator Amy Klobuchar, so it's a bipartisan bill, have already introduced legislation that would ban I don't know if ban is the right word, but reduce the ability of companies to use those pay for delay settlements between innovator companies and generic companies. So that's something that, okay, if that's not allowed anymore, is that going to lower drug prices? And that's something that sort of affects FDA. There's other examples of legislation that's aiming to get at that issue that's going to be an FDA type legislation that could be added onto the GDUFA process that we're going to be watching. I know the drug reimportation was voted on at the beginning of January and didn't pass, but it's just always comes back, and Trump has expressed support for that. So who knows? We could have drug reimportation, and that would have to be implemented by FDA somehow. So certainly that's an FDA type bill, not an FDA type bill. That's an FDA bill that would amend the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. So there's a lot of proposals out there, a lot of things that we're going to see introduced that are, again, indirectly drug pricing, but directly FDA related. So all of that we will be watching. The next point that we knew President Trump was going to do, the hiring freeze, he obviously said that during the campaign, and he implemented that yesterday with an executive order. So he issued an executive order yesterday. I would note that there is an exemption, positions necessary to meet public safety responsibilities. I don't know if FDA would want to take advantage of that. I know in prior government hiring freezes, they have, but it's been a little bit more nuanced in terms of what's going on politically. So I don't know what would happen right now. The tension there is that in December, we had the 21st Century Cures Act passed, bipartisan, and Rodney can talk much more about that whole process if anyone is interested in cures. But it actually has incentives in there for FDA to hire more staff. FDA has been short-staffed for a while. So that's a tension there. You know, how will FDA really resolve that? Can they get exemptions? Can they, user fee acts usually have hiring mandates. It's just like a clash of interests there. And then finally, during the campaign, he talked pretty strongly about, in terms of deregulation and regulatory reform, and he made a promise about for every new federal regulation, there would be 2 regulations out. And that sounds good as a promise, 1 rule in, 2 rules out, but I don't know how you really implement that, and especially with an agency like FDA or CMS, which I don't know much about, but where the rules really build on each other, how would you implement that practically? How would that really work. So
We're
that's
hoping 1 rule in FDA, 2 rules out, I don't know, EPA. Like we'd be able to barter with different agencies or something. Because as you know, the FDA is not a heavy rule agency. They're a much more guidance agency. That's where we see a lot more action. So we might get a handful, a dozen significant rules in a year, which is very different than CMS, where we'll get sometimes hundreds of significant rules. So those are kind of precious. We don't really want to have to kick 2 out just because. And rules are important for managing a lot of different areas that we work on with clients. So let's get to the exciting stuff. Who's going to be the commissioner? I want to do a quick rundown of who the options are so far. We have 4 people on the table. How many of you thought there were only 3 people on the table? You knew about the 4th one today. Okay, so everyone's reading their news feed. We're happy to see that. So first name that was floated was Scott Gottlieb. Scott is a physician. He is a commentator, a prolific media hound. He speaks a lot. He has experience in finance and policy. He served on a federal IT committee. He has been in and out. He's been in and out of FDA type commentary and policy positions for a good 10 years. It's probably more. And he can be very polarizing on the Hill. Is that a good way to characterize it? Polarizing. And that is simply just because of the comments and some of the actions that have happened in his involvement in different areas. And then we had Jim O'Neill. Jim O'Neill is a Silicon Valley investment firm manager. He's associated with Thiel, who is a major donor for the Trump campaign, and has spoken about a category of what he calls progressive drug approvals. So what we're really trying to monitor, it's a number of these candidates, I guess we call them candidates, considerations of the commissioner. They have public-facing comments, things that we can look to see, like you've said before, what have you said in the past when it didn't matter? Now it suddenly matters. And for example, Shervasian, who is probably the youngest of all of them, maybe Gottlieb's younger, I don't know, it doesn't matter, but he seems younger because he's very entrepreneurial and he runs a Bitcoin company and he's got a lot of investments in a genetic company. He's a Silicon Valley entrepreneur, very much in favor with the Silicon Valley network, who, as soon as there was word that he was being considered, deleted all his tweets and removed his account. So some weird lady who was tracing him beforehand, she was like screenshotting his tweets for years, which is the weirdest thing ever. Actually, I think she might have been a girlfriend, now that I remember reading. Anyway, I think there was something there, but she is now famous because she preserved all of his tweets. And he said some pretty inflammatory things about the agency and what he would want to do, how he would want to dismantle FDA. You'll all remember LA Times had an article in the fall during the campaign about Trump and that what he would do, would he take away the FDA? We've had internal debates of if that was even possible. Is it even something that could happen? I really don't think the FDA is going away, although they're not even talking about a commissioner yet, so maybe they're just going to get rid of the agency. We don't know. I don't know.
You're saying that, not me.
No, I'm just saying. Who knows, right? No, of course the FDA we think is still going to be around. We know this because they've sent beachhead teams. So the beachhead teams, there are 538 non-staffed folks, individuals who have been appointed as part of no formal process. They are part of a transition team. Do you think any of them are lobbyists?
Current lobbyists or yes?
I don't know. There's 538 of them. There have to be some lobbyists in there.
530 people who aren't lobbyists? No, you can't.
They can't. So they are, as of yesterday, sitting in the agency.
The guy going to FDA is a lobbyist, former lobbyist.
Yes, so Jack Calvarantidis is a longtime pharma lobbyist. He was lobbying for Covidien for a very long time. And he is not being floated for commissioner, but is absolutely involved and is in residence. So we understand he is at the FDA. So these beachhead teams are in. They have infiltrated. They are now at the agencies, and they are. I don't know how to say it. It's just like such a weird concept, but they help to control things until we get the process handled.
The beachhead team is this. Again, there will be appointed federal people who will go through some level of confirmation in almost every place in government. But until they get there, no one has legal authority. So you have this sort of strange situation where the bureaucracy is running itself. The beachhead team person is somebody who goes in. That person would be exceedingly rare for that person to then turn up in an appointed job. They may have a job within that agency later, but unlikely. And their job is basically just to be the hall monitor for the administration. Again, they don't have any specific legal authority to do anything. But then sort of, again, it's an agency on autopilot. It's just this extremely weird time. It's not really, again, remarkable stuff that didn't happen in 09 and 01, but, if you've forgotten 09 or 01, it all seems really strange.
Mm-hmm. Then, today, we got news that Dr. Joseph Gulfo is being considered for FDA commissioner. Do we want to take a poll of which one of these four we think would be better commissioners? Maybe we could do tweets to see FDA 2017. It's an interesting pick. He is a prolific writer. He has written a book, a number of articles. He has talked in great depth about how to redefine the FDA approval process for drugs. He has a process he calls conditional drug approvals. He thinks that there should be 4 types of drug approvals, not just one, which means yes, you're on. We have one type now. Once you're approved, you're approved. He thinks that there should be 4 categories of approval status that you were approved through either some sort of bio equivalence or some sort of bio impact data that had no actual efficacy data, but that safety would always be underlying. So it's a very interesting concept. He is a doctor. The other 2 in the middle that we talked about were not doctors. Scott Gottlieb is a physician. I don't think has practiced in a long time. And he's also an entrepreneur, but more a CEO type. He's been the CEO or the president and head of a number of drug and device companies. And so an interesting mix that we have out there. Perhaps these are just, we're making predictions. That's why you're here. Perhaps some of the earlier ones were floated as ideas in order to come to some sort of a moderation, which might be what Dr. Gulfo is representing. It's hard for us to tell. A few other things that are going to go along that you need to be aware of at the FDA, some structural and organizational issues. So the Moonshot program is no longer going to be run out of the White House, I suspect. And the one area where we know that has been formalized, and it was announced right before Robert Califf left, it was the day before, one of his last official acts as commissioner, was to launch the Oncology Center of Excellence, which was the FDA's component of the Moonshot Initiative, which has an oncology-focused disease center that will be the pathway through which stakeholders engage and through which research is consolidated. All of the agency experts on both drug, device, bio, any kind of product type within the agency will all go through this center. It's headed by Richard Pazdur, and there is an interesting development that came in the Cures Act where there's a statutory requirement that the FDA implement intercenter institutes, at least one. And again, we've been trying to predict and understand, we're watching this carefully. There have been talk of a cardiovascular institute, a center for cardiovascular. There's been a talk for a center around diabetes. These are all diseases that are very well-known diseases that have lots of different product types. And at the same time, and I've been quoted in some articles recently talking about this, and I was very happy to see that that FDA's drug area, Dr. Jenkins agreed with me. Actually, I think I agreed with him, but anyway, I don't know who was quoted first. That this is probably not, and we're stepping over a line here into. This is a belief. I think it would be a bad idea to have too many of these disease centers, and I think the FDA, at least through Jenkins' comments, agrees with that it's a very interesting concept for oncology, and that there may be some really important reasons why oncology would test this idea out. But I do want everyone to be aware that even in the oncology area, while this does not create a new combination type product formal process, it creates an organizational structure very similar to the combination products office, which is going to have drug and device people all sitting in the same room talking about your application and potentially slowing things down. And so I think there's some interesting tensions to just be aware of in light of all the transitions we're talking about, that it has been argued that these disease-focused centers would create some sort of speed to get things through. And I think when you're really focused on the process, it creates a middleman. It very likely creates another step through a process. And so we have to be aware of those.
Okay. How are we on time?
We're doing good. We have about 5 more minutes.
So from structural changes, we're going to shift to some enforcement changes, or again, these would be our expectations for some changes in enforcement priorities for the agency. We obviously haven't heard anything formally with no new leadership over there. But as some of you may know, there actually has been a lot of activity in the last year around off-label communications. And that's an area where FDA has been very reticent to really give any more. They really want a bright line in terms of what manufacturers can say about unapproved uses of their products, and to whom they can say certain things, who the audience might be. In the last several months, we had in November a 2-day public meeting that FDA held to hear from those stakeholders. And then right before the transition, last week, we had 2 draft guidance documents issued related to off-label communications, as well as a memorandum, which is a very interesting development because it's not something FDA really does, is just issue a memorandum with its thinking and basically explaining for stakeholders more clearly why it feels the way it feels. And this off-label memo was added to the docket for that November meeting. And for those of you who are interested in this issue, you can obviously comment on the memo, the meeting, all of that stuff until, I believe, April 19th or so. But there's clearly the Obama FDA wanted to get a lot of that stuff on the record before they went out the door. And even so, as Bethany talked about, guidance is very easy to change. I think that we will see a shift in enforcement priorities and potentially articulated policy changes related to off-label enforcement with the new administration, just because it's going to be, I think, more business friendly, and manufacturers really have for years tried to present, narrow, discrete, clear criteria for where they could talk about off-label uses, and let's do it this way for these audience. We really want to talk about, unapproved drugs when they're, for example, right before they're approved, to let payers know so they can plan their plan years. We want to be able to do that, to talk about our unapproved drugs. And that's just one example, of course. So I think there will be a change in enforcement related to off-label, maybe not in the near term, but over the next, few months, years. We have up there that something we noticed for the Office of Prescription Drug Promotion, in terms of their enforcement trends for 2016, you could see a change in terms of that issue and the First Amendment issues and really, the pushback they're getting from industry and now the courts on that, their very strong bright line related to off-label communications, you could see that translated in the OPDP enforcement last year. You really didn't see warning letters about you went too far talking about your drug into an unapproved use. The enforcement that we saw was about, this is an investigational drug that you're making look like it's approved, which is clearly illegal and does not implicate the First Amendment. And then there was a lot more YouTube, and there was a couple TV commercial warning letters where it was really about, do consumers really understand the risks? If you're talking about the risks, but you're showing all this flashy video and lots of music, consumers are not hearing the risks. So it was a very sort of nuanced enforcement related to what's clearly in the regulations. It was not that is it unapproved or not? Is this a First Amendment issue? Who's right about what we're saying here? Who's the arbiter of what's false or misleading when it comes to something a company is saying about their product? FDA really this year, or 2016, didn't enter that fray very much. And I think that will continue until the Office of Prescription Drug Promotion has their new mandate from the new leadership. What is the enforcement priority going to be? I think we won't see that much in the off-label space. I think that enforcement related to safety is unlikely to change, again, at least in the near term. So, where products are found to be unsafe, we saw a lot of activity in 2016 related to insanitary conditions in compounding pharmacies, which is still very politically charged following the New England Compounding Center disaster, which happened in, I want to say 2011. I don't know the exact year. Don't quote me on that. No, it wasn't that long ago. Anyway, I don't think safety issues are going to change in terms of enforcement. And one thing we'll be watching very closely is how the inspection priorities change. And I think that report that we mentioned earlier about the foreign drug manufacturing sites not being, inspected as frequently as they should, there could be a shift there in terms of enforcement priorities for the agency and inspection priorities.
Okay, so we've reached our hour, so we're not going to go through all of this. But the good news is we actually have a webinar series that is being conducted on the 21st Century Cures Act. We've already done one session. We have another one coming up on the 2nd of February and the 15th of February. These are some of the things that we've begun to talk about in our deep dive of the 21st Century Cures Act. Again, this is an important piece of legislation. It's huge. It has a ton of required steps. It is statutory, which is harder to change. It was bipartisan, so that's harder to change. And so we expect that there won't be there's going to be no repeal, repair, replace, rebuild. We're not rebuilding or doing anything with cures, which means that a lot of these things that I have listed here will go into effect. We'll see guidance documents. The interesting piece is that there is a bunch of required rules and regulations and guidance documents, which, again, we have to take into context of hiring freeze. So how much of this is going to get done? Is it going to get done timely? Some of these things, it's not on here, but for example, the breakthrough device pathway, the guidance document is supposed to be out in a year, but there's a statutory pathway that's been created. And the question becomes, if I want access to that breakthrough pathway, how do I get to it? FDA hasn't created the guidance. They have a hiring freeze. They're not actually going to be able to move forward on this. We have a freeze on regulations and guidance right now anyway. So there's a little bit of uncertainty around how some of this will move forward. We saw Congress has established a tracking module for this, I saw today, with deadlines and dates that they are going to be tracking all the implementation pieces and holding the agencies responsible. So I think it's important to pay attention to what's going to be happening with cures, because there's a lot of things that have already been set in motion that really can't be stopped because of the way that they were set in motion. So I'm going to just circle back to the journey, reiterate that we have user fee acts that will be coming through that are going to continue to play a big piece. And I know Ronnie and I talked about this before, but all of the agreements have already, all of them have been signed? Maybe not the biosimilars one?
No, biosimilars is done. I think only medical devices not
Maybe
sent to
Medufa
Congress.
has not been sent to Congress
And I don't,
yet.
sorry, I don't track animal drugs.
Yeah.
No offense.
we left it off. So even though there's been an agreement, is it possible that industry will go back and decide to renegotiate certain aspects, things that weren't included? It's possible. There's no rules about this. We can always see more renegotiation. So it depends, again, who the leadership is at the FDA. There's going to be huge pressure on Congress to implement these, and there's a lot of things that get added to them. So we're going to watch and see if there's additional, I don't know, maybe the ACA fix will go through with PDUFA. Who knows? Who knows? So obviously we are following the horse trading process. You will see this in the slides that everyone gets emailed afterwards, and so we'll be happy to talk about it. We don't have time now, but there are some significant changes being made to the Administrative Procedure Act that can impact all agencies. Please subscribe to our blog and join us for the Cures webinars that we have. As I mentioned, February 2nd, February 15th. And then if you're really interested in pricing, this is the big one. We are doing a pharmacy industry summit in DC. It's a 2-day summit. It was a 1-day summit last year. It wasn't enough one day, so we're doing 2 days. And we, save the date, pay attention. We have lots of people that join us from Congress, from the Hill, staffers, people from the transition teams will all be on board to help us understand what will be happening in the pharmacy industry. All right, questions? It's all clear now, right? Now you can go back, report to your boards, what's going to happen with the FDA. Okay. If there are no direct questions, feel free to approach any of us. We all have different opinions on what might be priorities. We're happy to talk to you, and thanks again for joining us.